Okay, we're going to go ahead and do the adding terrain stage. This is not a very long stage. We should go pretty quick here. We're going to need two new color variables, one for our upper terrain, and we're also going to need one for our lower terrain. Now, that would mean we're going to go run over to ColorHex and check out their latest palettes. And it does help to take a look. Look, my background is kind of like this pea green and the light blue, and my ship's red. So I want to pick colors for my terrain that are going to contrast with that and stand out. And so let's see here. Yeah. Look, we'll go with this army green right here. And we'll pop that into our lower terrain color. And we're going to grab this kind of bright brown. And we're going to put that into our upper terrain color. All right. Make sure you go over to ColorHex and pick some colors for your upper and lower terrains. Then we're also going to need some terrain variables. And so now our terrain variables, these are going to be related to the height and width of our terrains, and they're going to be constants. So we're going to turn on caps lock. And we're going to set the terrain width to 10 pixels. And then we're going to have a minimum terrain height, which we're going to set to 20. And we're going to have a maximum terrain height that we're going to set to 30. So minimum terrain height and maximum terrain height. This is going to give us a little jagged edge you see here. See how the edges looks jagged of the terrain on the top and the bottom? Basically, we're going to be generating 40 rectangles. They're going to be 10 pixels wide each. You can see the width of them. They're 10 pixels wide. And then we're going to be randomly generating heights. And this is going to be creating our terrain for the top and the bottom, two different colors. So we're going to need a minimum terrain height and a maximum terrain height. We're going to be getting random numbers in between those two numbers. Now that takes care of the variables that we need for this stage. And in the setup function, so we're not going to need to be in the start, but in the setup function, we need to call the add terrain function. So put that function call there in the setup function. Setup gets called by the start function. First thing that happens in the start function calls the setup function. And the setup function is going to set our background color. Now it's going to add the terrain and add the obstacles and sets up our vehicle. So our vehicle's on the screen. So now that we've got our setup function done, now all we have to do is go down to the add terrain function, which is down there at the end of our code. And this is where you're going to find the add terrain function. Like I said, this is going to be pretty quick. So down here at the end in the add terrain function, the very first variable we're going to set up here is going to be, it's going to keep track of the number of terrain elements. And it's going to be equal to our screen width divided by our terrain width. So in our case, our screen width is 400 pixels. Our terrain width is 10. And so if you do the math, 400 divided by 10 gives you 40 terrain elements. Then we're going to immediately use this variable. We're not going to have this for loop going from 0 to 1. We're going to have this for loop going from 0 to number of terrain elements. So where there was the number 1, please replace it with number of terrain elements. And then we just need to make our terrain elements. So we're going to need first a variable called upper height, and that will be equal to randomizer dot next integer and minimum terrain height, comma, maximum, let's find it, terrain height. There we go. And that's going to get us a random number between 20 and 30. We're going to set the height of our terrain. Now, this is the upper terrain object. It's going to be one of those individual rectangles that we're making. It's going to be a new rectangle, and we're going to feed it the terrain width and that upper height that we just generated there in line 258. So the terrain width is always going to be 10 pixels wide, but that upper height is going to be some random number at the moment between 20 and 30. Now, we're going to take our upper terrain and we're going to set its position. And we're going to set its position to our terrain width multiplied by the index variable I. This is going to effectively place our terrain values when I is 0 at 0, because 0 times 10 is 0. Terrain width is 10. When the for loop comes back around to make the second rectangle, I will be 1. So we're going to place that one at 1 times 10, x equals 10. This is going to put all those rectangles across our screen for us, nice and neat. And the y value is very easy for the upper terrain. It's 0. We're going to set our upper terrain its color to the upper terrain color. And then we're going to tag our upper terrain is terrain equals true. This will label that object as a terrain object. And lastly, we will add our upper terrain to the screen. Now, if I did everything right here and typed everything correct, I should have an upper terrain. And indeed I do. When I hit the run button, there's an upper terrain that I can see on my screen. Cool. All right. Now that I've got an upper terrain, I'm going to recycle these 5 lines of code. Don't recycle those until you know that they are correct. And everywhere I see an upper, I'm going to put a lower. Only one of those L's are necessary. And let's see, Control C, Control V, Control V, Control V, Control V. All right, and then over here, it's going to be, I can do it like that. Control V, lower terrain color. And the one thing that's going to be different is, up here, yep, upper height. Nope, not upper height, lower height. So all the uppers, all the words that say upper need to be changed to lower. Everywhere you saw an upper, it needed to be changed to lower. And now when I run it, I'm going to have a problem. My 2 terrains are laying on top of each other because, well, the Y position I've set for the lower terrain is at 0. That's not going to work. We need to actually set it to our screen height, but we want to subtract from that the lower height, that random number we just generated from the screen height. That will shift the rectangle from being like placed just off screen to exactly where it needs to be so the rectangle appears on the screen nice and clean, just like we see that. Now, there's one last thing we got to do here before we wrap this up. We got the terrains in, and that's all good and well, but our ship can fly through the terrains. We want our ship to actually collide with the terrains. So to fix that, we're going to actually break our program. First, we're going to delete all that stuff about hit wall. Check if you hit a wall, the if and the lose, and that. Just delete it. Here at the end of this, all you should have left is just the closing curly brace right here on line 219 after the last call to check element. Likewise, up here, our hit wall function. The entire hit wall function can just simply be deleted. We don't need it anymore. You can delete the whole hit wall function. Please try not to break any of the curly braces of, say, set obstacle position right here, okay? Don't break those curly braces. Then down here in check element, this is where we're going to fix things now. We're going to put in here, instead of just checking for if the element that got passed, if it's not labeled as obstacle, we want to consider the possibility that it might be labeled is terrain. And if that's true, we also want the same thing to happen. We want to call the lose function. If the thing that our ship collided with is labeled is terrain, and we just set all of these terrains up to be labeled is terrain. See right there on line 241 and line 249? So now notice here the ship has gone all the way through the terrain. That won't be able to happen anymore. As soon as the ship hits the terrain, it's all over. It's going to crash into the terrain. It's all over. There we go. So now that's going to wrap it up for today. And don't forget to like and subscribe. We'll see you in class.